Ciao a tutti ragazzi, benvenuti, ben trovati, sono già con le cuffie perché è tempo di fare una piccola intervista, un'altra intervista internazionale, non ne abbiamo fatte molte qua su questo canale, però quando c'è l'occasione perché no, soprattutto quando effettivamente davanti a me c'è una persona che ha ricoperto un ruolo importantissimo nella storia di videogiochi, perché stiamo parlando di Dave Grossman. Magari questo nome ai più giovani non dice nulla, ma è stata la mente creativa insieme ad altre persone che hanno effettivamente fatto la storia del genere videoludico dell'avventura grafica, la storia appunto, dietro Monkey Island, The Secret of Monkey Island e poi Monkey Island 2, Day of Tentacle, Full Throat, poi la serie indipendente Pajama Sam, che è poi Pyjama Sam, Sam e Max, insomma ne ha fatti veramente tanti, alcuni li ha fatto il design, alcuni li ha scritti, di alcuni capitoli di questi che vi ho nominato è stato anche il direttore creativo, insomma ha fatto di tutto, sarà qui con noi e insieme a me a fare questa intervista ci sarà Sara, ci sarà Kurolily, che insomma è una grandissima appassionata di avventure grafiche, ne ha giocate tantissime in live, ne parla sempre. Non perderei altro tempo, diamo il benvenuto a Dave Grossman. Ciao, hi! Parto io, Sara?
Vai.
Parto io, benissimo. Allora, Dave, innanzitutto te hai iniziato a lavorare come programmatore e designer a The Secret of Monkey Island e voglio farti una domanda generica proprio sul genere delle avventure grafiche punta e clicca, che è un genere ormai che è un po' caduto nel dimenticatoio, tra virgolette, anche se ci sono qua e là delle avventure grafiche che ancora tengono alto il nome del genere. Mi puoi spiegare che anni erano quello dello sviluppo videoludico degli anni 90? Come si lavorava? Com'era l'industria? Per uno che non l'ha vissuta, perché sono nato nel 90.
Well, it was small. One thing I should say is that you say that adventure games were popular then and have faded since, but I would disagree with that. There was an audience at that time which comprised a fair segment of people who played computer games, which was just not all that many people to begin with. And what really happened was other kinds of games came along and were very, very popular. And people who liked adventure games still liked them and kept playing them. So actually they sell more now than they did before. It's just that the entire industry has become huge and makes billions and billions of dollars. Now, but as far as working in the 90s was good for me, but my perspective is a little skewed. This was my first job after school. I wanted to work in computers, but I didn't know I was going to get to do something fun working with computers. And I loved doing it, and I loved the games. And it was all very kind of fresh and new, like your first job often is. And at LucasArts in particular, at least for the first couple of years, we weren't under a lot of pressure to even make a profit. They just said, make good games. And that changed eventually, but it all felt very free, and we were just entertaining ourselves and having a good time. As far as the industry in general is concerned, it was a hard business to be in because, like I say, the audience was pretty small still then. Everybody didn't have a computer in their house like they do now. And you couldn't just put your games online and have people find them. You had to actually make them physically and then put them in a store. And other companies were also trying to do that. And you kind of had to fight it out for shelf space. And that put a lot of constraints on what you could do with your game, how long it had to be, and and how much it had to cost. You couldn't make a cheap game because the store wouldn't put it on the shelf. They couldn't make enough profit on it. And another thing was we couldn't patch the games after they were out. So those last few weeks before you went to the master that was going to get put into every box were very, very stressful, because if you made a mistake, you couldn't walk it back.
Quindi meglio oggi o meglio prima?
Well, this is a bad time to ask that question because 10% of the industry just got laid off this year. Right this minute is a terrible time to be working in games and especially trying to break into games. I spoke to some young aspiring artists recently, and I was just like, well, you may have to wait a year before anything opens up at all. I will say that the size of the audience at large, like everybody plays games now, and there's digital distribution, and there's an independent games scene which is thriving and which excites me. And so I would say that it's probably by and large it's better today.
Bene.
Tornando agli anni 90, visto che appunto ho appena dichiarato che cioè persino ora è difficile fare una carriera nel mondo dei videogiochi. Lei una volta dichiarato che non credeva proprio che fosse possibile vivere di videogiochi, quindi non solo farne una carriera, ma sviluppare e vivere di questo. Quando è che ha capito invece che era possibile? Cioè quando è stato il momento in cui il LucasArts c'è stata questa epifania magari in cui ha detto oh mio Dio, Monkey Island è popolare, va fortissimo, posso vivere di questo?
I think it was actually much later than that. I remember saying that, and that was a reference to my first exposure to video games, which was when I was maybe 13 years old and discovering computers. And I had actually written my own version of Hunt the Wumpus, which is a very, very simple game. And I thought it was fun then, but then when it came time for me to go out in the world and find a job, I wasn't pursuing video games because it did seem like, oh, this is just a thing people do as a hobby. You can't, surely you don't nobody has that as a job. So I was surprised to discover that it was a job. And I remember in that first year at LucasArts, I had 3 office mates. Tim Schafer was one of them. Jenny Sword was another. And I remember her asking me, like, how long was I going to do this? How long was I going to stick with it? And I realized that I wasn't thinking of it as a career at that time, that I just really intended to do it as long as it was fun, and then I would shift to something else. And now it's, it's been 35 years, and I sort of never quite managed to escape. I've just been sort of motoring along and taking the next opportunity. And it has always been kind of dicey, in terms of job security, never very good, actual money, any of these things. And it was only really the last couple of years that I've even been able to work the way that I want to, which is to come up with an idea and sort of gestate it a little bit and pitch it and try and make it and put it out. I've always had to sort of be working for a studio or with a studio or something like that. So I've never been completely free. But I guess now it is my career, at some point randomly along that line, that became true. And I think probably that became true when I got too old to do anything else. Like I can't start over now. I can't get a new job. No one will hire me to do anything other than make video games.
E io ho letto un po' di tue interviste, compresa una a GameSpot, dove racconti in maniera anche abbastanza sentita la storia di Guybrush Threepwood che va in quest'isola a cercare il sogno della sua vita. Però andando a scavare un po' di più è ovvio che si trovino le ispirazioni sulla parte comica della saga di Monkey Island, ma non solo. Un po' tutte le opere di LucasArts sono avvolte da questa aurea di comicità, di demenzialità che io particolarmente apprezzo. E la cosa che mi ha colpito di più di tutto è ovviamente il sistema di offese tra personaggi che è una sorta di parodia dei film Cappa e Spada, con protagonista Errol Flynn, che lo dico alla chat, è una star della Golden Age di Hollywood, che faceva questi ruoli con la spada tipo Zorro, Robin Hood, e affrontava tutti a singolar tenzone. Quindi io voglio capire più che altro da dove vengono le vostre ispirazioni comiche, cioè chi sono i comici di riferimento o lo stile di comicità che avete sempre abbracciato per realizzare i vostri script, i vostri giochi e tutto il resto, perché delle ispirazioni serie ho già letto abbastanza.
Well, the short answer is everywhere. I think the comedy in The Secret of Monkey Island is pretty loose. It has a style, but it really goes all over the place. And sometimes it's being sort of inside the fantasy and the characters are really relating to each other in a way that makes sense in the story. And other times people are speaking more to the player, making jokes that are sort of outside the box, maybe even addressing the camera directly. Looking back, that feels it's fun, but it actually feels a little bit amateur to me. As we were all still learning our jobs, and I think as we got older and more experienced, we became more focused, and we realized this is a joke that works for this game, and this is a joke that works for this other game, but you can't kind of swap them around. Whereas The Secret of Monkey Island is mostly just the kind of jokes that we would make with each other. And we did lots and lots of references to whatever was going on around the office and to TV shows that we liked. Get Smart was one. There's that joke that people now quote often as a Monkey Island reference about the second biggest whatever that I've ever seen, but that's taken directly from Get Smart. It was a running gag on that show in the 60s. So we sort of co-opted it for ourselves. Now, you asked about the insults specifically, and those have been popular. Like people don't remember Monkey Island without remembering the insult sword fighting, and it's not just because it's funny. It's because it's an actual game mechanic, which you don't always see in adventure games that often. And it's interesting to play it, and it has twists in it and stuff. And the way that came about, it was Ron Gilbert's idea to do it that way. It wasn't in the plan at the very beginning. We just knew that we had to have some sword fighting in there somewhere. And we were thinking about like the Indiana Jones game and its fighting mechanic and what were we going to do here. And then Ron came in one morning and he said, I was watching a swashbuckling movie last night, and it occurred to me that what they're doing doesn't matter. It's what they're saying to each other that's interesting, and we should make a mechanic that works like that. So that was the genesis of it. And then, so he set Tim and I onto that. He said, let's work out some insults and some responses and stuff. And meanwhile, the writer Orson Scott Card was, I guess, a personal friend of George Lucas or something, was sort of loosely associated with the company. And we were trying to find things to do with him. And so we sent that off to him as why don't you try coming up with some insults and some responses to those insults that are clever, because, you're a professional writer and these guys are just video game programmers. What do they know? And our instructions with that were, just look at what he gives you, and if it's good, then use it. And if it isn't, then you don't have to worry about it. And I think a couple of the insults that are in the game actually come from that list. Not very many, because he wasn't on top of the requirements for the game system, for the mechanic, where they were going to have to be discernible, and then they were going to have to work for another insult later. And, there was a lot of kind of fiddly business around how this all had to work. So, we just took that and we went on our merry way, and we wrote all the things ourselves. And then I learned only a few years ago, Tim had become friendly with Orson Scott Card's son, and he said, my dad passed that on to his kids. He had my sister and I do that list of insults that came from us. And that just blew my mind. I don't know how old they were at the time. Probably not very.
Dello sviluppo degli enigmi della saga di Monkey Island, di Sam e Max, di The Day of the Tentacle, tutti i progetti ai quali ha lavorato. Sono tutti molto assurdi, cioè c'è questo fil rouge proprio che accomuna gli enigmi di tutte queste avventure grafiche che spesso rasentano l'idiozia, la follia. Come facevano a bilanciare la difficoltà degli enigmi con l'assurdità? Cioè come facevano a capire che una cosa poteva funzionare e che effettivamente il videogiocatore poteva capire cosa fare, invece che provare tutto con tutto come tanti di noi poi hanno fatto?
Well, you're right. Many of you did in the end, and that's we were not always successful at the thing that you describe. When it's working well, what happens is you sort of have an idea for a problem, that the player will face. And then you think of a lot of different ways that you could solve that problem, and you pick the funniest one, which is often the most absurd one. And then you try to sort of eliminate logically all of the other possibilities so that that really is the only way you can solve the puzzle. And then when you put the puzzle in the game, what you try to do is it's sort of like building a bridge across a stream from both sides. You make the problem very clear, and you make the tools readily available. And as you mess with all the tools, you should get ideally more and more information about what they do and what they can do. It's building from one side. And the more you poke at whatever character or whatever thing is involved with the problem, you should get more information there. So, and they both sort of gradually come towards the middle until the player goes, I know what to do now. I can bridge the gap. That's how the perfect puzzle design works. Obviously, our work is littered with failures. The monkey wrench puzzle is the classic example where we just weren't thinking things through, and we based a puzzle on a piece of wordplay, a pun, that only works in English and doesn't even work in all countries where they speak English because they call that object something else. And that was just too ridiculously impossible to solve. So I keep that in the back of my head at all times when I am assessing a puzzle that I have just designed. I'm like, is this a monkey wrench puzzle? And I try to think through, how exactly is the player going to solve this? What do they need to know? Do they have to have any particular context from their own lives to apply to this? And this is particularly important with kids games. I did a lot of kids games. Like, they can solve the puzzles just as well as adults can, but you must provide extra context because they don't know what everything means, and they don't always know what things in the world are for. So you have to help them with that part. And then they'll make the connections just as well as a grown-up will. Nowadays, we do that a lot. We go over the puzzles a bunch of times. We play test them with people who are good at adventure games, people who don't know what adventure games are, and we just watch them and we see, like, can they solve this? What is tripping them up with solving it? Is that a thing that we can fix, or do we have to go back and think of a new puzzle to go here, which happens more often than we like.
Che figata questo aspetto tecnico, non l'avrei mai detto. La cosa del ponte sul fiume è veramente bellissima. Io ho altre 2 domande, quindi faccio una Sara e una. Faccio questo ping pong. E proprio perché Sara ha citato Day of the Tentacle, che per me, non me ne volere, ma è il tuo capolavoro, cioè comunque è l'opera che preferisco tua, per una semplice ragione, perché c'è una grandissima influenza dei corti e dell'arte di Chuck Jones, che è per me uno dei geni più grandi che hanno camminato sul suolo dell'animazione, diciamo così, insieme ad Iwerks, i Fleischer e pochissimi altri di quell'epoca. Quanto è stato importante l'influenza di Jones nella realizzazione di Day of the Tentacle, e in che modo soprattutto?
First off, thank you for the compliment on that one. Day of the Tentacle is it's my second favorite, I think, of my games now. It's the Return to Monkey Island has nudged it out. I do think that one of the things that makes Day of the Tentacle work so well is that all of the pieces of it are pursuing the same goal, which is to make you feel like you are inside of a cartoon. You are playing a cartoon. And obviously the art does this. The characters squash and stretch a lot, and they're sort of simple colors and broad fields, but also just in terms of the design of the puzzles, you're required to think like a cartoon character. And so you spoilers, the game's 30 years old, so that's probably okay. You wind up painting a white line on a cat to make people think it's a skunk. And that's just an example of the kind of thing that doesn't work in real life, but that works in a cartoon, and that works in this game in particular. And of course, that comes directly from Chuck Jones. I don't know if he specifically was responsible for the Pepe Le Pew cartoons where that happened. Yeah, so we grew up on these Saturday morning cartoons, Chuck's and other people's too. There just was a lot of that floating around in the backs of our minds as we were thinking about this game and what we wanted it to be like, and there just proved to be sort of no end of ideas along that line, and they do work particularly well with the absurdity of adventure games. When you are playing an adventure game, you typically are called upon to do absurd things, and it's because that's what's fun about adventure games. It's really hard to make a good one on a serious topic. So trying to make one that was a cartoon really played well into that, and that's again one of the reasons I think it works as well as it does.
Per
innanzitutto-
rassicurarlo, l'ha creato Chuck Jones nel 45, e il primo corto in cui fa l'apparizione è Adorable Kitty. Quindi sì.
Avendo Dave lavorato anche a Bone e avendo creato appunto l'adattamento videoludico di quella che era poi una famosa serie fumettistica, la mia curiosità era quanto è più facile o più difficile lavorare ad un prodotto completamente libero, come era al tempo appunto Monkey Island o The Day of the Tentacle, e quanto invece, cioè quali sono le differenze quando si ha un canovaccio già scritto, si ha un prodotto fumettistico al quale insomma si deve tenere fede, cioè quali sono le più grosse differenze?
That's a good question. Working with an IP is kind of a blessing and a curse. It immediately draws a box within which you must work, but it can be good to have that box. It allows you to make decisions more easily. Research is key for this. Like a good skill for a writer to have is mimicry. Just to be able to sit down with a property and sort of absorb it at length. What kinds of moments will I focus on in this game, and what kinds of jokes can I make? What do the characters sound like? Just all of these things sort of need to get in your head, and then you just sort of go forward like that. Bone was particularly interesting. We weren't just making a game to match an existing intellectual property. We were making a game to match a story that had already been written. So usually what we will do is we will take the IP and try and find an area somewhere within it that's not covered. We'll take some minor characters maybe and expand their stories somewhere, something like that. With Bone, we did not do that. It was lockstep along with the comics, using all of the principal characters, and that story's already been written and we already know what happens. So that was particularly challenging, and we had to sort of find the gaps in the story. Unfortunately, there were some. Sometimes there would be like, oh, a little time passes and now they're all at the inn, something like that. And we're like, aha, we can put some play in there and sort of show what happened in between this moment and that moment. And they'll wind up here, but it'll be interesting and fun to get there. And I think perhaps the biggest challenge of that escapade, there were two games, and the second one was The Great Cow Race. And it's in the title. The game is all about the lead up to this race. They race cows instead of horses, and that's, part of the fun in Bone. And the race is in the comics, and we know who, and yet you can't make the game and not have the race in it. You got to do the race, and we went round and round about that quite a bit before settling on get into the race thinking that winning the race was your goal, and then changing the goal sort of mid-race so that just mere survival was going to be good. Just sort of move the goal, and it wound up, I think, pretty compelling. I'm pretty proud of how that turned out. It's a shame we didn't make another one.
E allora ti faccio un'ultima domanda che riguarda il lavoro mio e di Sara, cioè il lavoro di streamer. È molto difficile giocare avventure grafiche punta e clicca su Twitch, perché c'è un fenomeno tutto di Twitch che si chiama backseating, cioè le persone si affollano nella chat per dirti cosa devi fare, come assemblare gli oggetti, con chi devi parlare, eccetera eccetera. Quindi io vorrei giocarne di più in live, ma so che quando giro la testa per leggere la chat e parlare con loro, interagire con loro, sicuramente ci sono almeno 100 persone che ti dicono la soluzione del puzzle o dove devi andare. Se tu dovessi sviluppare un nuovo gioco, una nuova avventura grafica, in linea con i social, in linea con questa sovrabbondanza di informazioni e questa esondazione delle informazioni che poi ci ritroviamo tra capo e collo noi, che idea troveresti per evitare il backseating su Twitch o quello che ti deve dare sempre il suggerimento o anche le 10 miliardi di guide che troviamo online per risolvere i giochi? Praticamente il giorno dopo l'uscita del gioco, il giorno stesso addirittura.
I mean, you could just not look at the
No,
chat.
non ce la faccio. Sono troppo,
You're-
What I do, that's
sono
what I
troppo,
do.
sono troppo divertenti.
This is not a new phenomenon. It didn't come along only with streaming. Maybe it's only a problem with streaming, but we have always in adventure game design talked about the sort of living room couch experience. Because although these are designed almost exclusively as single player games, they are very good to just sit on your couch with a bunch of people and play together, and everybody sort of chips in some ideas. Now, I'm talking about a group of 5 people, not a group of 3,000 people, right? So there is a difference in how quickly they will come up with the right solution, and that is a matter of scale. If you talk to people who design ARGs, alternate reality games, a thing for a while, I guess there's probably still some out there. One of the problems is that you put it out in the world, and then you get a group of 10,000 people playing the thing and all communicating with each other. And so everything that you thought was going to be very hard gets solved very, very fast. And you have to sort of work to keep up with the speed, and you have to sort of time a few things out that can only be solved after a certain amount of time and stuff like that. So I suppose that one approach to your problem would be to just make the games very, very hard. But I don't really want to do that. I do like to make games that have variable difficulty, so that if you're looking for a casual experience and you're not a hardcore adventure gamer, then you can play the game one way, and if you really like to have your brain challenged, then you play in the hard mode. And certainly if you're streaming, you should probably always do that if you're going to have a bunch of people backseating along with you, helping you solve it. It's an interesting problem, though, because I do want you to stream my games. There's some
Anyway.
there's some disagreement in the community about the value of streaming, and because adventure games are sort of mostly about discovery and the story, some designers in the field think that if a bunch of people stream their game, then people will just watch the streams and then they won't buy the game. And I actually am on the other side of that argument. I think that more exposure and more advertising is always better, and for every person who just watches the stream, they're going to be 4 more who go out and buy the game. So I think you people are doing us a service, and I love it. So I want to make a game that you want to play on the stream, and I'm not really sure how to solve the problem, though. So I'll have to think about it. You've given me something, I'm working on a game, and I'll just,
No problem. We'll be waiting.
We will wait.
Yeah. Ovviamente ringraziamo Dave per essere stato qui con noi e per averci raccontato questi aneddoti, questi retroscena. Se vi sono piaciuti questi contenuti, ragazzi, ricordatevi che al Florence Game Festival 29 e 30 marzo ci saranno tantissimi ospiti che affronteranno temi di questo tipo, verranno intervistati a questa maniera e faranno anche di più, perché ci sarà proprio l'occasione di incontrarli fisicamente, potranno autografare, potranno interagire con voi entrambi i giorni della fiera e poi del festival. Per tutti gli ospiti questa cosa riguarda. Chissà che magari il prossimo anno Dave non ci faccia l'onore di raggiungerci nella prossima edizione, chissà, mi piacerebbe molto. Ci sarà anche Sara, ovviamente, che farà delle interviste, insomma sarà una degli NPC, si chiamano così, quindi a servizio degli ospiti in questa nostra prima edizione il 29 e 30 marzo. Grazie Dave e grazie a Sara, ovviamente, per essere stata qui con noi. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.